Welcome to Legal Innovation Spotlight, the podcast that brings you the latest advancements in legal tech and knowledge management. I'm Ted Theodoropoulos, and I connect with the industry's brightest minds to provide you with valuable insights and actionable takeaways. So sit back, relax, and let's dive in. Ab, how are you this afternoon?
I'm doing great. Just living on the energy from ILTACon last week. So yeah, doing great.
Yeah, I know. I love the Nashville venue, and it's been 10 years since they've had it there, but I'm really excited that we're going to be going back. Like next year is DC, and then I think 2 years in a row or something. I think we're doing Nashville or something.
Yeah, it was my first time in Nashville. I didn't know, I had no expectations going in. Really enjoyed Nashville as a city, and definitely I'm glad we're going back to back to Nashville because quite frankly, I got lost way too many times to count. So now if it's in the same venue, I'll have at least a good mental map of where to go, all the shortcuts to get from A to Z.
That hotel is a labyrinth.
They're expanding it. So maybe expanded by the time. Yeah, by the time we go back, it might be expanded.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was I remembered a little bit from the last time, but it was so long ago that I still got lost a lot. Like I was meeting people at a Starbucks that was like, I don't know, you could throw a baseball and hit the other Starbucks I was supposed to be at. And I'm like, I'm here. Where are you? They're like, no, I'm here.
Yeah. Good times. But that's how you meet new people. So
Right. Well, good stuff. So you and I got connected. I saw your name on the ILTA awards list, the Distinguished Peer Awards, and you had an article that I read and thought was great, and thought to myself, man, this would be worth having a conversation. Then you and I chatted and found out there's all sorts of overlapping interests that we have, and we've had some both have a long history in the legal tech space. So before we jump into all that, why don't we do an intro for those that don't know you? I think a lot of people do know you because a good measure is I've been in legal tech for about 15, 16 years and have always been very active on LinkedIn. So how many mutual connections somebody has is usually a good indicator of how networked into the legal tech community and KM community they are, and B, obviously how active they are on LinkedIn. And you have 451 common connections. So a lot of people that know me know you. So, but you're currently CRO at Lupl, which is a task management platform. You were at Latera prior to that. You got a wife in legal. Like, give us a little bit of background on you and what you're up to today.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on, by the way. I've been listening to your show and delighted to be on this side. And usually I interview people. So this is always a fun feeling to be on the other end of the mic. So I've been in legal for about 10 years now. So actually the ILTA that you were talking about in Nashville, that would have been my first ILTA, but I joined a startup, I think a bit too late to make the cut at that point. But I trained as a lawyer a long time ago and fell into legal tech, which is, I think, how a lot of people get into legal tech. And of course, a decade plus ago, it wasn't really identified as legal tech. It was just, people building technology for lawyers and law firms. And the very first startup I joined was a company called Xref out of the UK. And the founders of which have now found Jigsaw, the diagramming tool. And I was an early employee, helped grow that business to an exit to, it wasn't called Latera at that point, it was Microsystems, but what eventually became Latera. So I guess my claim to fame is I was part of acquisition number one that started the whole flywheel. And I was at Latera for about 22 or so acquisitions.
Wow.
It's better to count the number of acquisitions in years, and then started at Lupl because I love being in startups. I love the fast-paced, energy-driven environments there. About 2 years ago, actually, so coming up to my anniversary very soon, and it's been absolutely amazing. Besides that, people probably know me and recognize my name from something I created 6 years ago called Fringe Legal, which creates content for law firms on innovation, KM, a big overlap that you and I have. And of course, my wife is also in the field. She works for a large US national law firm called Baker Hostetler. And we are, I think, as I learned, one of actually much bigger cohort of couples that both work together within legal and legal tech. So Greg Lambert did a great segment on a bunch of couples, and we were featured on that. So people may recognize her name from that as well. And she has written and spoken about a lot of very interesting ideas, actually. So people should check her out. Her name is Ab Saraswat.
She was an award winner as well on
She was.
the same list, which you
Yeah.
guys both had articles, both in legal tech, both writers. What was her article regarding? Do you remember?
It was around coded bias. I'm going to completely butcher the summary of it, but it was essentially around as we move into more algorithmic ways of working, there is inherent bias that gets introduced because a lot of algorithms are obviously created by humans, and there's a lot of bias that gets introduced. So how do you manage that? How do you think about that? And what you should do about that, actually, from a DE&I perspective, and as well as from a privacy perspective.
Interesting. Yeah, bias is a very hot topic with all the AI conversations that are going on right now. The Well, before we jump into the agenda,
Yeah.
I saw you posted a little graphic / animation that you built in Flux, and I've been playing around with Flux, and I'm using that term loosely. So I saw Ethan Malik post something on it. I followed some steps. I got it installed. It's quite a hefty download,
Yeah.
but I've been struggling with accessing it through Comfy UI, really doing anything meaningful with it. It looks like you got it to work, and that was a super cool. It was a little abstract, like I couldn't tell if it was a split screen or it's
Yeah,
like
so
a
what I wanted to create was essentially this sort of split screen, which had the ILTA vendor exhibit hall at the bottom, or representation of that, and then in the background, the city line of Nashville. And the static image I got created in Flux. And for anyone who doesn't know, Flux is an image generator similar to Midjourney and what you might be able to create in what was and still, I guess, is called DALI in ChatGPT. The problem is, as you found out, Flux is not the most user friendly at the moment, and it was only released, I think, less than a month ago. So that makes sense, and it's an open source tool, so it does require some careful step following to get up and running. But I did actually, I fed the same prompt into Midjourney as well, which I use a lot. And the results were night and day for Flux. They were so impressive. It was very, very good at following my instructions and the input I had provided. And then the amazing thing for me, I'd been looking for a experiment or some use case to try one of these, animation platforms, these AI animation platforms. So I actually just put that image into Runway ML. And I think, like you, I've been playing around with a lot of AI tools over the last 2 years or so. There's not that much that blows me away, but I can tell you it blew me away. So much so that as soon as I got the export, I had to go and show it to my wife. I sent it to a couple of friends. I couldn't believe it. And the big thing is, for people who watch it, imagine you feed a very static image and you look at the very first frame of that image. There's all of these tiny people that are dotted around. There's not too much detail. And there's some screens in the background and all of that. There's a lot of detail. And my instructions to Runway was create an animation of this as if a drone's flying over this landscape. And I thought it was just going to create essentially that, right? Like a zoomed in parallax effect. But the thing that was insane was it animates all of these individuals walking. It knows what a screen is and it adds lighting effect with flicker and all of that, even in the cityscape. And it did that from one prompt. That was the very first output I got. So I didn't run it multiple times. And it took about 35 seconds. It is unbelievable, scary as well, but unbelievable. And there's obviously a lot of things to be mindful of, but yeah, it was a really, really cool project to just play around with, as a wound down from Ilticon.
Yeah. Did you see my post? It was a couple of days ago about the CEO. I can't remember the name of the company now. They make it is a iOS app for artists, and
Okay.
that's not my world. Anyway, he gets on X and
Hmm.
has a monologue about how effing much he hates Gen AI and how that will never be a part of their tool set. And I thought that was really silly. I mean, I guess it's a good way to go against the grain and generate some PR. But like long term, like we're in the top of the first inning in this AI ball game, right? Like
Yeah.
to put a stake in the ground and say we're never going to do that. And I know a lot of artists feel like they're being infringed upon. And those things
Sure.
will work themselves out, just like they did when the MP3 came out and Napster. They figured it
Hmm.
out, and they're going to figure it out here with AI. And to say we're never going down that road as a tool provider, I don't know, man. That seems limiting.
Yeah, I mean, it comes up and it probably plays well into a broader topic as well. So I can see the perspective, and again, I take everything I see on X with a grain of salt, because it is, it does go against the grain and certainly got them a lot of interest and views. So it definitely works from a marketing perspective and getting attention. Um, and I think actually instead of the MP3, I would probably liken it to when things like Photoshop and Illustrator came about, right? So if you think about it, I have this print behind me. This is a print that was created by an artist, not me. And this was created in Procreate, which is kind of like Adobe Illustrator, but for artists. 15, 20 years ago, um, when those tools came about, people were like, oh, you can't go in and edit photos in Lightroom and Photoshop and all of this. It's not really true to the art form. And there was a lot of, and you basically create different segments. You now have like the purists who are just like, we shoot in film still, and you get a different look. And those that actually adapt to it, and they've created film like looks to things, right? Instagram was brought out of that need as well once upon a time. And then you have completely new, previously unimagined categories that get created. And from ILTA, I remember something from the keynote. They were talking about data and how you can use data to tell the story. The line that stood out to me, which has nothing to do with data, is when you're looking at information, there are still questions that you can't imagine that you should be asking until someone asks them. And I think this is kind of the same thing, which, what kind of categories do we end up with in 2, 3, 5 years from now, using a blend of some of these sort of AI generated art that just become the norm. And then something else will come along and people will be like, well, we can't have that. That's insane. Um, so I don't know. It is, but there are a lot of things to figure out. So I don't want to undermine all of that, but you need people like us to play around with it, to push the boundaries a little bit. And in turn, of course, artists who are skilled and who can create things like that and aren't just typing a prompt. There should be a compensation mechanism or certainly an attribution mechanism to that, so you can actually recognize where the work's coming from.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, this is a very broad question across AI. I mean, with perplexity as well, you have
Yeah.
you get answers, not links, and those
Mhm.
answers remove the necessity to click into the links where the answers came from, which is how people generate revenue. And so, yeah, there's still a lot to figure out. I think there's 30 active lawsuits going on right now.
At least.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so, well, that's good stuff. And by the way, it was the CEO of Procreate who
Mm.
put that stake
But
in the
there we go.
ground. um, well,
Yeah.
well, you and I were going to talk a little bit about build versus buy in legal, and
Mm.
we are very fortunate in one sense because we don't really have much competition in the legal intranet space.
Mm.
Legal extranet, you still have HiQ, but um, it's really us versus kind of custom dev. And
Mhm.
it blows me away how many firms are still marching down that path as the default, right? And I think
Yeah.
part of it, a little bit of background in in this space, the incumbent vendor, who shall remain nameless, has not really innovated at all in 6, 7, 8 years now. And I think a lot of customers maybe got a bad taste in their mouth because they had made big investments. And it's difficult to move an internet platform. There's a lot of content customizations. So I get that. But, you've been on the vendor side for a long time. I mean, I'm sure have run into this too, like challenges. What do you see as the big ones for law firms and doing custom dev?
Yeah. And, it's funny because a decade ago, this was a big hot topic, build versus buy, and a lot of firms doing custom development of all sorts of things. Whatever they identified as a problem, they would like to build that first. And there's some firms who are, very much sort of ingrained in that sort of ethos, and that's fine. Then it died down until recently. I've started to see a lot more of this, and part of that is, of course, we're living in this world of large language models and what you can do. And you can certainly go out and use different large language models and build technologies on top of that. And in fact, a lot of firms are doing that, right? If you speak to most firms, most large firms, they've built at least at a bare minimum some sort of a chatbot, firm name X bot, and that's fine. But there are considerations that should go beyond that, because if you put yourself into that position, the building part is the easy part. Even though it looks like and seems like that's the easy part, that's also the most exciting part, right? Because you're creating something, you get to speak to your users, you get to speak to the market and go out and actually give them what they've asked for. And of course, you get standing ovations, and it's amazing. As every software company knows, that is not the tough thing, right? And again, if you're providing something to your user base, then you don't have to go out and get customers, so you're fine there. But what you do need to do is maintain and support that. And that is the thing that takes most of the effort, is the 80-20 rule. Is the 20% that will cost you 80% in time, resources, and effort long term. And to be able to do that at the pace of change for technology. And that's really what you need to think about. And I think, I'm not saying firms don't, they certainly do, but it's something that is it should be a big part of the discussion, because when you're thinking about budgets, and a lot of the time, I find firms and companies will go down the build path is because it's actually cheaper to build something initially than maybe to buy something off the shelf. And of course, it's going to be perfectly suited to your scenario. Now, that may work depending on what you need. If you just need some sort of an internal tool, a simple internal tool to, manipulate data or convert files and so on, sure. But what's the cost over the 5 years in terms of developers, in terms of actual time? Because if I put you as a developer on this, sure, it might take you a month to make something, but now you should probably be tied for the next 11 months too in the feedback and the iterative loops that you get. And then there's a maintenance burden. So I think those are some of the things. And what I'm seeing, interestingly now is, and I'll just pivot a little bit to the AI side, but it applies to all technology. I think it's not just build or buy, it should be build, buy, or partner. And that partner means finding someone who is an expert in this, who does 80% of what you need, and then working with them to provide them feedback and input into the roadmap. And we do that. We do that with our customers. We are very, very open to getting feedback, and we iterate and develop and release based on that, because it helps us, right? It's what the market is asking of us, but we are a software company and we are designed to support the tech stack. And also as a customer, if you're going with an external vendor like us or you guys, you get the benefit that we are collating feedback from hundreds of customers. Yes, you get to solve your problem, but you also get to benefit from the questions that you haven't asked yet that somebody else has asked. So anyway, those are some of the high level thoughts, but yeah, I would love to get your reaction on that.
Yeah, no, I think that the support and ongoing maintenance component of the TCO equation gets grossly underestimated, sometimes not even factored in at all. And, it's, that's one issue. It's very rarely less expensive over the long haul, even the medium term for a firm. The bigger issue, and I've been in software development forever. Like I used to code BASIC in, I had a TI 99 4A, Commodore 64, Timex Sinclair 1000, the whole alphabet soup, all those early computers, Apple II. And, I've been writing code for a really long time, and used to work for Microsoft, was a freelance consultant for a number of years, and then turned that into a business. So I have a really good understanding of how many disciplines it takes to do app dev right. It takes architecture, it takes product management, it takes support, it takes SDLC, it takes, all of these things by themselves are really difficult. What you need to have subject matter expertise leading each of these disciplines. And then when you factor in the opportunity cost, where the scenario that you described is a common one, and it's worth a conversation. If there is a competitive advantage at stake, then it's worth a conversation. But if there is off-the-shelf tools that you can buy to solve your problem, why are you going to deploy your very valuable technical resources to solve that problem? It's not money. You're not going to save money over the long term. It's sure as hell isn't time, right? You're going to get up and running much more slowly. And from a risk perspective, you're assuming all this additional risk. It's a real head scratcher for me, honestly.
Yeah, and funny story, I used a 386 back in the day, a compact Despros 386 to do some basic programming. That was my introduction to computers when I was very, very young. But I agree with you. And, there's obviously all of these other components, even in the build equation, that are important to adoption. And forget all the support and training. That is, of course, a given. But even now, the focus on UI UX, right? We have UI UX designers on our staff, and most software companies do. And we spend a lot of time making small adjustments that, that you wouldn't think about that matter. But those are the small adjustments that actually give you long-term success. And I think it's about following your core competency, right? It's making sure as a law firm, and there are instances 100% of the time where it makes sense for you to go out and build something because frankly, it doesn't exist anywhere else. To your point, it could be a competitive advantage, or it's a useful thing to build for the community. And there's certainly some firms that have done that. They've released it either as an open source or a consortium project or something different. But I think if there's a known problem with known solutions, you should investigate those before you go down the build path, and at a minimum, before build, make sure you rule out the partner path, because working with someone who, I live and breathe task management. You live and breathe intranets, extranets. I can tell you on any conversation, a lot of the things that come up from, 200 conversations we had at ILTA that were very similar. I'm sure the same thing for you. That's our competitive advantage. You don't have to go out and do the due diligence. Have the conversation. If nothing else, you'll learn a lot about what your peers are thinking about.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And we do the same thing. We have an advisory panel of C-suite. We probably have a dozen AM law firms that are on it that help guide our product roadmap. And it's very helpful. And to your point, incorporating feedback, not just from the use cases that you think about and have time to address, but the broader market that you may never think about. But once you see it, it's like, oh my God, that's amazing.
You can't unsee it after that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right. So you and I talked a little bit about software adoption in the AI enabled world. And we talked about some of the limitations when it comes to natural language interfaces and adoption. And, one of the, I've been a challenger on the Copilot front, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but I think that there's a huge gap that's actually getting written about quite a bit lately about where firms say they're at in terms of AI tool usage and what actually is, right. And
Right.
Stephen Embry wrote an article about I think he called it Mind the Gap. And his observations were anecdotal, but he compared his observations with some surveys that had been done about what firms
Mm.
are actually doing with AI. And I'm having the same observations as him, which is they're actually doing very little with it right now. It's a lot of experimentation and um, a lot of thinking and a lot of maybe small pilot usage, but I'm not seeing much beyond that. I don't know. What are you seeing in your travels?
Yeah, so I guess just to be very specific, I think you mean this as well, but I think when we talk about AI, we're talking about generative AI and sort of
Yes.
generative
Sorry.
AI of
Yep.
recent days, right? Because I know you're going there anyway, because of course AI, there's actually penetration is pretty high, depending on which practice area type of tools you're looking at.
Yes.
And I think there's a lot to be said around where firms are, but at the same time, it's a weird position because there's a lot of hype and noise around we have bought tool X or we are looking into this application, this use case. But yes, the adoption isn't there. Part of that is because it's only 18 months old, right? And if you think about forget AI, general tech adoption within law firms, my world at least, it takes time. There is that big focus adoption piece, and that's when you have known use cases. Right now, we're in the world of where testing technology that is very new and no one really knows, so everyone's learning as they go. We are developing use cases as we go because we don't know the real problems we want to solve. And the solutions that exist on the market are in preview all the way to sort of beta releases. So they're evolving, hopefully in line with the previous two things. So I think as you combine all of them, of course, you're not going to get, 100% penetration or anything close to that when you think about use cases and so on. And I think people need to keep that in mind because it's aligning expectations to reality. If your expectation is we're going to buy this thing and within 6 months everyone's going to be using it, which by the way is a picture that gets painted sometimes. So you need to be mindful of that. And that's probably a good starting point. Beyond that, I think how you approach adoption should be different for AI tools and these sort of prompt-based tools, let's just call them, than how you might think about adoption for whatever your norm is for technology rollout.
Yeah. And are you, Lupl, are there generative capabilities within Lupl, or is that on the roadmap?
Yeah, there's some. So we have, because it's 2024, we have the ability for you to be able to prompt the system to be able to scope and plan your matters, which you can do, or to actually send in work. Probably the more widely used AI component for us, which you and I will discuss for sure, is our integration with Copilot, which is live. It exists in the Team store, so you can actually query Lupl data directly from Copilot without needing to leave where you're spending a lot of your time working. But we can talk about that. But I think even as we think about the prompting, right? If you look at that, if I just give someone an empty box and say, you can plan and scope your work, describe your work, you write a 1, 2, 3 sentence prompt saying, there's an infringement suit from X against Y for copyright in these jurisdictions. The plan that you're going to get from that is going to be pretty basic. We've done a lot of work to try and sort of interpret what that means in the back end. But the reality is you need to provide people training and guidance on both the level of detail that's needed and how best to put that data into the system. And that then needs to be interpreted against the large language model that you're using. Because if you're using something like OpenAI or on Azure or otherwise, sure, you can put that in that way. If you're using Claude, Anthropic's API, actually it can take a lot more rich text. You can actually give it certain fields. You can format information in a specific way. You have things like prompt caching that's part of that. So the user should not really have to think about that because they may not know what any of these words mean or care, frankly. But you need to provide guidance, and part of that is don't give people what I like to call the white screen of death, right? So if you think about ChatGPT, which most people will be familiar with, if you look at the early iteration, it was just type anything you want here. And it's not a good use. I don't know what I want to type here. What are the parameters? What's the guideline? And you end up typing things that aren't that fun. Write me a song, write me X, but it's not useful to you.
Yeah.
As we move into the world, which many assume is going to be the future of Copilot, small c, then you need that Copilot to have, and ChatGPT introduced this a year ago, for example, OpenAI and ChatGPT, have the sort of starter prompts, these suggestions. What can you do with this? What should you be able to do with this? Depending on the agent, the assistant, the persona that's behind the scenes. So you do need to think about that because that has an impact on setting the right expectation and getting the best result with the least amount of effort from the user.
Yeah, I had a post about. I've been talking a lot about my LinkedIn posts lately, but I'm pretty.
Yeah, you write a lot.
I'm active on the platform and share a lot of thoughts.
Prolific.
That way.
Prolific, I think is the word.
I like it. I like it. So I had a post that got a lot of traction. I mean, it was probably the best performing post of the year, which was around. I leveraged a metaphor and said that ChatGPT feels like Windows, Claude feels like using a Mac, and Copilot feels like using MS-DOS. And you sent me the article that kind of got the thinking around the Mac and the Windows PC. That was a great article. But Copilot as MS-DOS, I came up with that because that's what it feels like to me.
I was going to say, yeah. Why? Well, I'm curious. Yeah, why do you think it's like MS-DOS? Just because of the text-based nature of it and how you have to instruct it?
Yeah, it doesn't understand. It has a much harder time than Claude and ChatGPT understanding just natural language. There are certain, like in PowerPoint, for example, these are the in-app the in-app copilots that I've mostly played with, and you have to ask for specific. You have to phrase your prompts and use terminology that's specific. If you say things like, and I'm going to make this up, this probably is not accurate, but create a slide for my lemonade stand with a juice box and a bottle of water, and one's 50 cents and one's $1. Like that didn't work. Like it said, wait, I don't know what you mean. Do you mean, it gave me suggestions on how to rephrase it. And I was just like, this is painful. And then when I finally, I was literally making a sign for my kids that they were creating a lemonade stand out in front of the house. And I was like, oh, this is a great opportunity. It fell flat on its face. I ended up going to ChatGPT and using DALL-E to create a couple little images and then piecing it together myself. But there were other examples of where it just doesn't work at all. Like, in Outlook, I use custom categories for all of my calendar entries. So, and I color code them. So I use the Covey quadrants, like important, not urgent, important and urgent, all that sort of stuff. And that gives me in one view, in 2 or 3 seconds, I can look at my week and go, man, I'm being proactive this week, or no, I'm not. And it's super useful to me. And I asked Copilot to go in and summarize by category the amount of time for this week using the custom. Can't do it, and which blows my mind. So what it tries to do is it reads the title of the meeting, and then it tries to create its own categories. And so I really tried to make this work. Like I went out into the forums. I posted. Somebody from Microsoft said it. I don't know, some updates coming, it'll work then. But I ended up defaulting back to ChatGPT and Claude because it's easier. Even like when I was doing some analysis on the ILTA roster from 10 years ago to create that 10 years of innovation document, I asked it to categorize the 300 job titles that have the word innovation in them by seniority, and said, I gave it the categories like C-suite, director, manager. It couldn't. It choked on that. So I uploaded it to ChatGPT, and it worked. And it's like, okay, is there some nuance that I'm doing wrong? Probably, but like, I don't need any training with ChatGPT. Why do I need it for Copilot? So that's why it feels like MS-DOS to me.
Fair enough. I'm going to share two stories. I'm going to preface this, even though I'm going to come off sounding like a Microsoft fanboy. I'm not. And I have no affiliation with Microsoft. But if you want to hook me up, Microsoft, I'm here. So I think there's two things. One, I heard a story, and hopefully when this goes live, someone can post it in the LinkedIn comments, who came up with the story. I think a firm was rolling out Copilot, and what they found in order to get the best output was to instruct their associates that they should talk to Copilot like they speak to their support teams or their colleagues. And what was the surprising takeaway from that was people started just calling their voicemail and just speaking as if they're speaking to a colleague, because those voicemails are automatically transcribed, and then they can copy and paste that information into Copilot and Outlook or Word or PowerPoint, whatever it might be. And that had much better result. I don't know if it will solve your problem. I suspect it probably won't, based on the categories information. But I think the key takeaway is the amount of information that most people are providing is not even close to enough compared to what you need to provide. And I think if you've spent time in ChatGPT and other places, some of your prompts end up feeling like they're a book in itself, at least to set the scene. And when you're writing, when you're typing, you're not doing that. It's easier to speak to the systems. That's number one. Two, I'll go back and underline. I think, Copilot is a preview product. I think it'll be unfair for me to call it a beta release, because I think it feels earlier than that. And it goes back full circle to a conversation of build versus buy. I mean, this is a trillion-dollar organization who has invested billions of dollars with a B in making Copilot the thing for them. That's the big bet for Microsoft for the next 5-10 years. And it's going to take some time with all of their resources, all of their skill and the money. And it's just hard to build products as you think about integrating elsewhere. And probably, I suspect the reason it works is, I'm making this up, I'm guessing, they had to make Copilots, big C, very lightweight in Microsoft, in Office, because I think each Copilot in Outlook, for example, has probably a very restricted knowledge understanding compared to Copilot on the web, because there's a cost consideration, right? So that's why I can do great things with summarization of emails, the thing I use the most, and almost everything else. I mean, I spend a good amount of time in Excel, and my biggest value point was going to be, I can just tell it the formula I want, so I don't have to sit there and write all of these, crazy lookups and all these other statements. It's not great. It's really not great at doing that yet. So I think hopefully improves a lot, right? And for anyone who's building on top of it, including us at Lupl, we know we're building a beta version on top of a preview version. And I go back to the question as a builder that you should ask. And that should be, as Copilot, the underlying technology behind Copilot improves, does that improve what you can do with it? Or does that put your product completely out of the mix, because Copilot can now do that, right? And ideally, you want to be in the first category where, as Copilot improves, Lupl and Copilot get 10x better. But there are the wrapper technologies where Copilot improves. And we saw this already with a lot of the APIs. You can do that with one API call, what you spend, building for the last 6 months. So it's important to think about those things too.
Yeah, and I'm long term bullish on Copilot for
Hmm.
sure. Yeah, I agree with you that it's just early, but they're selling it at
Yeah,
$30 a user, right? Like
right.
that's not a beta
It's
price.
the expectation versus reality gap, right? But again, I go back to what's the market willing to pay?
Yeah.
It's difficult to fault a business to charge people money that they're willing to throw at you for the most part. Um, but I completely understand, right? And there's a lot of, there was a bunch of physical products that came out as well. And I think we're going through this motions of people releasing products that aren't ready for prime time and just saying it's a beta. And, in the olden days, meaning 2 years ago, they would have been called a alpha or MVP product. So I think we're just playing around with labels a bit too loosely at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I know it. I know it will get there because Microsoft always does. Even in the browser space, like I'm an Edge user now. Like IE sucked, and so did Edge for a really long
until
time. They
until they
adopted
move to Chromium as the base. Yeah,
exactly, exactly.
yeah,
That's when I made the switch, and now I'm seeing
yeah.
cool features that you
Yeah.
don't get
And
in
what's
other.
really funny, they moved to Chromium as a base, and now Chrome takes up more resources than Edge does, even if you do the same thing. So,
I know it's well again long term. It's going to be hard to beat Microsoft. That's
yeah.
an uphill battle, and in our world, like the internet extranet world, in terms of AI capabilities, it's really around content classification, categorization
Yeah.
is really an interesting use case. Like for example, we integrate with the Lexus API
Hmm.
and we give like a no code way to drag and drop docketing
Yeah.
information or news information on a page. And if you want to like entity matching between
Hmm.
what's in your PMS and what's coming out of the
Hmm.
Lexus News API, that's not an easy, it's Bank of America with a C instead of a K at
Yeah.
the end for their it's like there's a lot of
Yeah.
nuance that AI can assist with. Natural language um, interfaces, and then really translation is next level.
Yeah.
SharePoint out of the box manages some of the, they call it localization, but
Hmm.
in the app itself that we build in the application layer in InfoDash, there
Yeah.
are pieces that we're responsible for, and AI translation is next level.
Yeah. And
So,
I think for me, at least my big bet is in the future in the application layer. Right now, for most applications layer that are using generative AI, it's pointing to one large language model or one API call, right? So you're going to OpenAI, you're going to Mistral, whatever it might be. In the future, and for all sorts of reasons, you want that to go through some sort of a buffer. So what's referred to as an agent a lot of the time, and depending on the task, because the agent should be the cheapest thing, but it's able to take your request, break it down into the different jobs to be done, the task, and then based on the requirements, farm that out to different models because there are some models that are great at reasoning, some amazing at math, some amazing at something else, and some that are just really cheap where you don't need to do a lot, right? If you just need to summarize an email, you probably don't want to go to the most expensive model because the summary is going to be the summary. So find the cheapest or the open source model that you're running. Because again, or everyone thinks about this initially as this is what we need to do, but times that by a million calls and think about what your costs are there as well, and the outcome and the results. There's work being done by a number of companies there, and there's certainly sort of companies that focus on more agentic features. But I think that needs to be built as part of the application layer in a lot of different ways. And it'll give, again, the best outcome because it's setting the right expectations. If the expectation from the user is you can use Copilot in Outlook to categorize your calendars or to give you a summary of all the categories, and that's the wrong expectation that's been set, right? It's a better expectation is best for summarizing emails and to be able to write and assist in the drafting of email based on how you write. That still has value, and maybe the second piece comes in the future, and that can then be added in the roadmap.
yeah. Gosh, we're already running out of time. This conversation went so quick. It's the the different models, and
Mm.
there's everybody talks about Anthropic and OpenAI, but you've got Mistral, you got Llama. What and I've fooled around a little bit with Mistral.
Hmm.
I have not with Llama, but what are some of the cool, maybe non or less mainstream tools and platforms that you've kicked the tires on that have promise?
I don't know if I know the less mainstream one. I follow this space a lot. I don't play around with all the models, but I think I would say there's two categories. There's obviously the closed source models like the Anthropics of the world and OpenAI, and there's the open source models. But even within that, the cool thing for me is looking at the model sizes. So you'll start seeing, and it's already been there, all these models that are coming out that is, this is a nano model or a 7 billion parameter model or whatever else. And the really interesting thing with all of those is we're working towards, I think, and by the way, I'm not an expert in this, so take everything I said with a pinch of salt. You should be able to run some of these models on device. What that means is on my phone, I can download, the Llama 7 billion parameter model, which is maybe a gig or two. And that means I can do a lot of the computation on device. As you think about data privacy and things going into the cloud and into open servers, I don't need to do that. I can just do some of those things on device easily, right? So if you think about Apple Intelligence, Apple sort of foyer into there, that's part of the approach that they're taking as well. So that's really, really cool. And what we're seeing is some of those models can be trained on a smaller subset of data, but to create the same level of output because they're focusing on a specific type of reasoning. So there are some that are just really, really good at solving math problems. By the way, I have zero need to solve complex math problem as I've not tested any of these things, but they score very highly on the benchmarks. Some that are very high on reasoning. So actually that means they can understand this sort of natural language bit a lot better. And some in legal as well that are trained on specific data, pertaining to how laws are interpreted, written, and all that kind of stuff. So those could be really valuable. I've not played with any of the legal AI models, but I played with a lot of the other ones. Like Google's Palm model is pretty interesting. I played with a lot of the Llama models. And for coding, as an armchair developer who has zero coding skills in real life, those have been amazing and amazingly cheap to be able to run, especially even on our hosted servers online.
Yeah, I've had a lot of fun recently with custom GPTs and Claude
Mhm.
projects, and have found some interesting insights. First of all, neither platform has these custom GPTs well documented, and so you have to kind of find on your own like limitations. Like if
Yeah.
you look at the documentation, it used to be able to upload like 10 documents to a custom GPT. Now it's 20.
Yeah.
On the What I have found just through experimentation is that you have a lot more headroom on the training document side on ChatGPT than you do on
Mhm.
Claude, but that doesn't
Yeah.
make the output better. So, for example, you have to be more selective. Like one thing I did to train my legal KM model
Mhm.
is I took all of the transcripts from all of my podcasts and put
Right.
them into one big text document. ChatGPT loaded that fine.
Right.
Claude completely choked just that one file.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
what I did was
You
I
have to
went
break
in.
that up.
Yeah, well, I used selective episodes, the ones I thought
Mm.
were the most high value, and then I also took chapters from a legal KM book, and I had to be
Yeah.
more selective. But you know what? The output was better when I did that. Like I asked,
Yeah.
like I ran all of the sessions from the ILTA um, agenda through both and said which ones are legal KM related. Claude did a
Yeah.
better job highlighting the ones, even though
Right.
I had more training documents in that custom GPT.
Right.
So I don't think that it fully loads everything in its entirety. It reaches in to a certain point and then the rest gets ignored is what it feels like.
Yeah, and I mean, it's one of those things that will improve. I remember, I mean, if you think back to when the API was released for OpenAI, they were, very the context window was so small. I remember going through and just banging my head against a wall on, chunking and creating a chunking function, and just thinking about the logic for something I was creating. Now it's barely an issue, right? You have all these models that have, 32, 64,000, 100,000. I think Palm has a model that has a million contact, a million tokens. Um, Over time, it becomes a non-issue. Again, there's cost considerations to all of that. But yeah, I think some of these, I think the GPTs, it's one of those things that can have tremendous value for most people if they use them, because the amount of time that you want to essentially think of it as a persona, right? If you're asking the same kind
Exactly.
of questions, just give it a personality, give it a name if you want, and then you have someone that you can just have the similar kind of conversations with. And yeah, certainly some of this. One of the things I use a lot, I like sort of going into the learning about sort of different historical things, and I just have one which I just ask questions about, different events in history, just so I have sort of jumping off points and just learning a bit more. And those things are really useful. And it, sometimes takes a minute, 2 minutes to create, and just have tremendous value long term. And you can share that with friends, with colleagues, and all that kind of stuff to give, if they don't know how to do it, they can benefit from it at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah. I use several custom GPT and Claude projects, one of which is to create the agendas for this podcast.
Yeah.
So I record the call, I have a
Yeah.
30-minute call. We talk through things. I upload the agenda into a custom GPT. I've loaded things like the skills survey that talks about
Yeah.
all of the priorities for CAM, a bunch of different stuff. And then I've given it custom instructions to define what the output should look like. And it takes me seconds. You know how I used to do it? I used to have to listen to this thing
Yeah.
over and over and then take notes. Now I can do it in like 3 minutes.
Oh, the horror. You have to listen to a call again. Come on.
Again, yes. Like I have the call and then I got to go back and listen to it again
Yeah.
and take notes. I would literally spend probably 40 minutes on it. And now it takes me like 3, which is incredible.
No, I think that those are the kinds of things that, that will expand. I don't know how much better they're going to get. And frankly, it probably makes zero difference to you if instead of 3 minutes, you can get it in 1 minute.
Right.
But if you can do that for a broader variety of things like the K&I thing that you're talking about, or the skill survey, where it can actually handle that data and understand the relationship between the different reports, that'll be so much more valuable.
For sure. Yeah. Well, Ab, this has been a great conversation. There was a bunch of stuff that we didn't even get to, but it's easy when you're talking to like-minded folks to jump down rabbit holes. But I do think it was a really good conversation.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I did not think I was going to talk as much technical stuff as I did, but I enjoyed it nonetheless. So yeah, thanks for having me on again, and I can looking to continue the conversation with you in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have to do it again, maybe a little bit down the road after, some new developments in the space, and maybe by then I can really get Flux working. I might hit you up and get some coaching on that. All right. Well, good stuff.
I can help.
Thanks for your time, and we'll chat soon.
All right.
All right. Take care. Thanks for listening to Legal Innovation Spotlight. If you found value in this chat, hit the subscribe button to be notified when we release new episodes. We'd also really appreciate it if you could take a moment to rate us and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now. Your feedback helps us provide you with top-notch content. Want to dive deeper into the world of legal innovation? Connect with us online at getinfo-.com, where you'll find additional resources and articles. You can also follow us on social media at getinfo- to stay updated on the latest news and insights in the field of legal tech and knowledge management. Once again, thank you for joining us today on Legal Innovation Spotlight, a fireside chat series hosted by Info-.